Okay. Members, the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. I remind you again to be conscious that the new audio and video equipment in committee rooms is significantly sharper. This means that when the committee is meeting in public session, side conversations are very likely to be picked up by microphones. Nobody in the public gallery. Declaration of interest. I'll just ask you if you have any new interest to declare that were not declared at our first meeting that are relevant, please do so now. Apologies. We have an apology from Anya Murphy. Any other apologies? No. Okay, thank you. Next Monday is a public meeting in lieu of St Patrick's Day. Therefore, the packs will for the 21st will be sent out on Tuesday the 19th as opposed to Monday. Draft minutes, I refer you to the draft minutes dated the 7th of March 2024 in your packet, pages 5 to 13. Have you any comments, or are you content that I sign them?
Content.
All agreed? Thank you. Okay. We have some matters arising that I've noted. Response from the Department dated the 12th of March 2024 in your table of papers, page 3, regarding the reinstatement of the small fishing grants. Minister stated that he will shortly be considering a 5-year strategic plan to support the marine and fisheries sectors, which, as well as offering support along the lines of previous EU funding, will provide incentives to enable industry sectors to become more economically and environmentally resilient. The aim is to have the new scheme of financial assistance open for applications from July 2024, with up to 3.1 million available in support to support all industry sectors during 2024-25. Obviously,
excuse me, we've gone out of quorum, so we can't note that Patsy's gone out.
Okay, but we can note that, can we? No,
No.
That's a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there anything we can move on to while we're not in quorum? That means we need to come back to the minutes as well, then. That's the case.
Had he gone out there?
He had, yeah.
Okay, we'll have to come back to the minutes.
Okay.
We'll just wait a second to see.
Okay, we'll just have to wait then until we become quorum again.
We could do, we could, not even point in doing any of the correspondence, because that would be a decision as well. So, is he coming in? Yeah. Mm-hmm. We'll just suspend for a minute.
Okay, let's suspend it.
Committee Room 21. Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound.
Sorry about that. Okay, apologies, we weren't quorum. We approved the draft minutes. So,
Chair, could I make a suggestion on the draft minutes? Notice my attendance wasn't noted, and I think maybe I was there.
okay.
I was maybe in another world. Usual thing.
Okay, with that exception, are we all agreed? Thank you.
Actually, it says that I was present and also that I have an apology.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll amend that.
Apologies, we'll change those.
Okay. Thank you. With the exception of those two amendments, are we happy to agree? Okay, thank you. We're on to matters arising, and first matter arising was the response from the Department in relation to small fishing grants. There is a new 5-year strategic plan to support marine and fisheries sector. as well as offering a support along the lines of the previous EU funding, will provide incentives to enable industry sectors to become more economically and environmentally resilient. The aim is to have this new scheme of financial assistance open for application from July 2024 with up to 3.1 million available to support all industry sectors during 24-25. You all content to note that, or have you any comment? Content, thank you. The next item of matters arising is response from the Department of the 12th of March. Table papers at pages 4 to 5 regarding the Pause for Thought group. The Minister has provided a substantive response. Pause for Thought was created by DERA in 2020 and seeks to coordinate the actions of relevant statutory agencies to disrupt the trafficking of low welfare pups. It includes representatives from DERA, PSNI, Harbour Police, HMRC, local councils and the two main ferry companies. No animal welfare groups are presently included in the membership of Pause for Thought, as these groups have no statutory enforcement powers. However, the Minister recognised the valuable role and influence that these groups have within the animal welfare sphere. Content to note. Next matter arising is a response to the Department dated 12th of March in your table papers pages 6 to 7 on the TRIPSI funding. Current framework has been in place since 2016, during which time DERA has invested around £48 million. Spend for each year set out in the response. Reduction in spend 2023-24 is due mainly to two factors. Several previously delivered initiatives were not delivered due to the undertaking evaluations, and also the baseline of 921,000 directly to three other department baseline budgets. Development of a TRIPSI action plan for 24-25 is underway. I think it was Anya raised this maybe issue, but you can tend to note, I'm sure if she has any issues around it, she'll come back to us. Next matter arising is a response from the Department dated 12th of March in your table paper pack at pages 10 to 11 on the breakdown of costs of the Windsor Framework Protocol. In year, DERA was awarded resource DEL allocations totaling 28.2 for 2023-24, and funding was allocated from Treasury under three distinct streams as outlined in the response. Staff costs of 18.6 million are the greatest expense and relate to both operational requirements of the inspection regime along with support staff. I think, members, one concern we had with that was that the department actually had to bid the Treasury through some business case every year, which leaves it obviously, I suppose, inconsistent for them because they're not sure whether they're actually going to get it. I think there's broadly an agreement that they will get it, but I think this year they didn't even get all that they had bid for, which was the concern. So you're happy to note for now, but it's something we may have to return to in the future. Okay. Okay, next matter arising I have is a response from the Minister dated 13th of March. Your table papers pages 12 to 21 regarding an update on the status of agriculture planning applications. While noting the committee's reference to 300 plus applications, the Minister states that the Department is currently in receipt of a total caseload of 94 agriculture planning consultations. The response provides a breakdown of those and that 83 are outside the statutory deadline. The Minister advises that processing of cases was held up when the old ammonia standing advice was in place and the issuing of advice based upon that was paused. This pause has been lifted and the Department is providing case-by-case site-specific advice until such times as the new ammonia strategy and standing advice are in place. There are some delays as staff are upskilled to the new case-by-case advice approach. Members, NIEA are in front of us today, so I'm sure we can develop that a wee bit further if you're happy to note this response in present. Okay. Next matter arising, refer to the response from the Minister dated 12th of March in your table papers, pages 8 to 9, regarding matters raised by Mr MacDonald KC. Minister states that the defective premises, Northern Ireland Order 1975, is not environmental in nature and should not have transferred to DAERA in 2016. Department for Communities officials have agreed in principle that the 1975 order should sit with DFC. Officials are currently exploring the legislative protocols of having the 75 order transferred to DFC by way of a transfer of functions order. Whilst DAERA sympathises with the residents, the Minister states that any subsequent amending legislation would require full public consultation with the building and insurance industries and be subject to the usual primary legislation procedures of the Assembly, and believes this would be a matter for DFC to address. Also further in your packs, pages 2-5.
Right, Chair, could have been in that there, please, that item.
Yeah, well, it's just, there's a wee bit of, there's also a bit of further correspondence
Sorry,
at 252
Tom.
and
Right.
253 on pages 34 of your table papers from Mr McDonald KC, which includes the response he has received from the Minister Muir, which is basically similar to what we received, and that Minister Muir has made representation to the Community Minister on Mr McDonald's behalf. Also, there was an email yesterday which has indicated that I think the matter was thrown out of court at this stage simply because the law doesn't facilitate it. So again, this matter is complex, and as a number of committees have been contacted, relevant clerics have been meeting with cleric assistants to ensure a coordinated process once all committees involved have received replies from their respective ministers. Patsy, you want in first there?
Thanks very much, Chair. Just looking through all this and reading the Minister's response, it appears to me that, well, by whatever way it has happened, the legislative duty is with DAERA to address this issue. Now, and I see from the Minister he wants it passed over to DFC, but as it stands at the moment, the legislative duty to rectify this matter, and I was coming down the motorway there this morning, I heard that gentleman on talking about the awful plight he's been in with his £250,000 of savings tied up in an apartment he can't use, along with others. So it might be useful an insight. I don't understand why the department can't deal with this, because it has the remit, and other departments where the legislative remit falls to them deal with it. Mightn't want it or like it to be with it, but the actuality is it's with the department, and I'm sure there's a former minister sitting here, and I'm sure she too has encountered these types of situations. So can we just get it tied down? I'm not into it is my responsibility, but I'd rather it be another person's responsibility. Could we just get this tied down? And I know the department or the Committee of Finance were looking at this yesterday as well, and I think they may well be writing to this committee too to try and address it. So the established fact is, A, the legislative duty is with DAERA, whether DAERA likes it or not, or whether they would want it or not, but the legislative duty is there. And from what I read or what I hear, I'm not a legal person, it's a case of amending the legislation to bring it into line with what it is in the UK, and that's from 6 years to 30 years. That seems to me not a complex piece of legislation. If a bit of an amendment to change it from 6 to 30, right, that's maybe oversimplification. But what I'm suggesting is, Chair, it might be helpful if we could get some, if you like, objective insight from Assembly Legal Services on this matter, as opposed to ping-pong round the place from one department to another and pass the parcel.
Okay, Patsy, take your point on that, and that may be helpful. I do think, though, that my understanding from reading all of this is that DFC have agreed that it should sit with them and have agreed to take it on. Now, whether that process is a speedy process whereby DAERA can transfer it quickly to DFC, I think that's the main point at the moment, because if that can be done quickly, we should just get on with that and get on with the process. If it can't, then maybe it's a point for DAERA to...
There's quite a bit there about consultation with the various industries and stuff, and we know whenever self-interest kick in, especially around insurance companies and stuff and litigation and the likes, that could be used as another method of kicking the tin down the alley on the part of the
I
insurance
would
companies.
imagine, though, Patsy, if there isn't a consultation done, I've already spoken to some people around this. If there isn't a consultation carried out, then there's a chance of a legal challenge then from those who weren't consulted on it. And I think that's probably a difficulty of the department. I'm not here to defend the department, any of the departments, by the way, but that's just what
I'm not suggesting that there should be a legal challenge. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is, I'm thinking, and I'm listening to that on the radio this morning, it's heartbreaking. He's not going to be too concerned whether there's a consultation period or not. Really what he and others need is the action here and now. And if the duty and responsibility falls to the department to introduce amending legislation to legislation that falls within its remit, to address a difficult situation for a lot of people who are in real tricky circumstances. If we can find out a time scale, and if that time scale is going to be elongated by a further consultation period because it's been transferred over to another department, really.
my understanding is whether it's transferred to DFC or remains with DERA, that there still is a consultation period required.
Yes.
That's my understanding. Now again, not here to defend the departments, but in light of trying to protect people that are impacted and affected, I think we need to try and do this the speediest way possible. And if that means getting it transferred to DFC quickly, I think that's right and proper. If not, if that's going to be an elongated process, then maybe DERA should just take it on. So, are you happy at this stage? And I'll bring John Blair in. Are you happy at this stage that we get an opinion from legal services?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Sorry, John, you wanted in.
Thank you, Chair. I think, and I hope not misquoting here, I think my perception is similar to your own, that the consultation and process that would be involved is not about where the thing belongs or which department has agreed to take responsibility, but actually about the amending legislation itself, and that's what the consultation period would relate to, and therefore the delay would be there, whether it transferred or not. The key here is that it would be transferred to a department that, as I read it, has already agreed to take it and has other related matters within its responsibility, so it would be a neater fit with perhaps a better, more cohesive outcome for all involved. I think we will be updated. I hope we'll be updated. We may want to request that just as the process develops. And I suppose you should declare I've been contacted directly by people on this as well, so I'm particularly keen to see it resolved. But I want it resolved in the best way and the most fitting way.
Well, look, can I emphasise then again that while we'll get legal services and a view from them, from the Assembly Legal Services, that our view is that this should be dealt with the most expedient way possible, practically from this committee. Is that fair? Okay, thank you. Okay, next matter arising that I have is a response dated the 13th of March from the Minister, pages 21, 22 of your table of papers in relation to the ammonia strategy and how many farmers have taken up low emissions equipment available to date. With regard to update of low emission slurry spreading equipment, Department commenced the provision of grant aid through Manure Efficiency Technology Scheme, which is METS, between 2010 and 2014. Total of 320 systems were grant aided through METS. Following on from METS, which commenced in 2016 to date, 1,443 businesses have been grant aided through the Farm Business Improvement Scheme capital funding, and a further 272 businesses have received letters of offer. Any comments on that? No? Okay. All right, members, any other matters arising from yourselves? No? Okay, we'll go into the next agenda item, which is in private session. It's a briefing from the Public Finance Scrutiny Unit. Okay, members, we welcome the representatives from the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. David Reid, Richard Crowe, Mark Hammond and Dr. Sarah McGuckin. You're all very welcome. So it's over to you. We'll hear from you. You will find the first day brief on pages 18 to 58 of your pack, and pages 59 to 85 is the key challenges. So anyway, over to yourselves, David or Richard, or who's kicking off?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, Deputy Chair and committee members. Let me start by wishing you all well in your new roles and let you know how much we look forward to working with you in the time ahead. By way of introduction, my name is David Reid and I'm the Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and I'm joined today by Richard Crowe, the Director of Resource Efficiency Division, and Mark Hammond and Sarah McGuckin from our Natural Environment Division. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to provide you with an overview of the work we do within the agency and the key issues and challenges that we now face. The agency's primary purpose is to protect and enhance Northern Ireland's environment, and in doing so, deliver health and wellbeing benefits and support economic growth. The agency has 5 key priorities, and they are working towards a fully compliant, regulated industry, delivering freshwater environment at good status, tackling waste sector crime, supporting good habitat, earth science and landscape quality and enhancing species abundance and diversity, and promotion of environmentally sustainable development, infrastructure and access to quality green and blue spaces. To deliver this remit, the agency has around 600 staff supported by around 40 agency workers. Our staff are located in Lisburn, Jubilee House in Ballykelly, Clare House and until the end of this month, the Klondike Building in Belfast. We also manage 7 country parks and 65 nature reserves. In terms of funding for the current financial year, the agency has a total budget of just over 29.5 million resource and 3.9 million capital. The resource budget includes 46.1 million in total expenditure and 16.5 million in income. We have 2 sources of income. Around 10.3 million comes from regulatory fees and commercial income, and we also earn 6.2 million from the carrier bag levy. Carrier bag levy income is used to fund the Environment Fund programme, and this equated to around 3.9 million resource and was supplemented by around 1.6 million in green growth capital funding in 23-24. The agency is made up of 2 directorates and a business support team. In Resource Efficiency Division, we are responsible for environmental regulation. This is a fairly diverse remit and includes the regulation of water and waste. Natural Environment Division is responsible for protecting, enhancing and monitoring the natural environment, its biodiversity and landscapes, in line with our nature conservation obligations, and the provision of advice on projects, plans and programmes that might impact on the natural environment. I'd now like to update you on some of the key issues that we are currently dealing with and the challenges for the year ahead. As you're aware of the resource pressures faced across the public sector, the agency is not immune from those pressures, so we look forward to seeing the outcome of the budget process to allow us to plan and prioritise for the year ahead and maximise the positive impact that our resources can have in protecting and enhancing the environment. This will include supporting the delivery of significant elements of wider departmental programmes. DAERA is a statutory consultee in Northern Ireland's planning process and typically receives around 4,000 new statutory planning consultations annually, and these require subject matter experts to provide advice on a range of environmental issues. As a statutory consultee, DAERA is required to provide advice to planning authorities within 21 days under the General Development Procedure Order and 30 days under the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, and our current response rates as a statutory consultee are running at around 72%. The Department's response rates to statutory planning consultations within statutory deadlines have improved significantly over the last year, and this has been achieved by maximising the amount of time the case officers spend on casework. In addition to the statutory caseload, DAERA also deals with around 1,000 non-statutory planning consultations annually. Moving to Moboy, the agency's Moboy remediation team is developing a strategy for Ministers' consideration on the options available for the Moboy site. It follows that there is no agreed preferred option, and there will not be until options are developed and presented for the next stages of scrutiny and approval. You will also want to note that NIEA is pursuing a criminal justice outcome concerning the unauthorised disposal of an estimated 627,000 tonnes of controlled waste on lands at Maguire Road. On water quality, the latest statistics show that the health of our water against ecological and chemical status. In 2021, about 31% of our water bodies recorded good ecological status, but none have reached good chemical status. This is due to the inclusion of what are commonly referred to as forever chemicals. These chemicals remain persistent in the environment because they are resistant to biodegradation, and an example of this includes firefighting foam. How we improve the quality of our water bodies is taken forward through our 6-yearly river basin management plans. The third cycle plan covers the period from January 2022 to December 2027, and although it was finalised in October following public consultation, October 2022, it now requires ministerial review in light of the Loch Ness issues before bringing to the executive. The River Basin Management Plan includes the programme of measures which summarise the actions identified to protect and improve the water environment in Northern Ireland during the third cycle plan. The previous Minister did approve an implementation plan to enable officials to progress with preparatory work to deliver on the programme of measures to improve water quality contained within the draft plan. Stakeholder engagement has been ongoing to identify smart targets for measures that apply across Northern Ireland. There are over 80 measures, and the key actions include projects managed by our delivery partners, including NI Water, as well as teams across the department. A number of pieces of work ongoing across the department will help to deliver improvements in water quality, including the review of the Nutrients Action Programme and the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme. The Minister will bring forward the Environmental Improvement Plan in the coming weeks, which will then be followed by the Water Quality Review Report and the River Basin Management Plan. It is important to stress that improvements in our water quality will only be realised by everyone working together. No one agency can deliver this work on its own. To date, in 2024, NIEA has confirmed 3 locations of blue-green algae on Loch Ness, as well as 2 other locations in Northern Ireland. We are currently assessing monitoring requirements and resourcing ahead of the 2024 season, and officials have held discussions with representatives from the Emergency Preparedness Group on the 1st of March regarding interagency coordination in advance of the 2024 season. DERA is also drafting terms of references for a tactical coordination group. We intend to run a desktop exercise to test these protocols between now and the end of April, and we will invite key stakeholders to participate in that process, and that will include the Food Standards Agency, Public Health Agency and councils. Turning to biodiversity, Northern Ireland's biodiversity and natural ecosystems are under significant pressure, with indicators showing continued biodiversity loss and species such as breeding waders like the curlew and butterflies and other insects in decline. 55% of our most protected ASSA features are in favourable condition, while our Article 17 report highlighted that 1 out of 49 habitats and 12 out of 28 priority species were at favourable conservation status. The main pressures on our biodiversity include pollution, developments which can lead to habitat loss and fragmentation, invasive species and climate change. The Department's primary mechanism for safeguarding biodiversity has been through the designation of protected sites for nature. So, for example, we currently have 394 areas of special scientific interest, 57 special conservation areas, 16 special protection areas, and 20 Ramsar wetland sites, all of which are designed to safeguard habitat and species of national and international importance. Turning to ammonia, NIEA provides scientific advice to inform decisions by planning authorities and projects that may impact on our environment. When it comes to ammonia and nitrogen deposition, the agency had been relying on earlier published ammonia standing advice, also referred to as the operational protocol, as the basis for its consultation responses. The agency was instructed by the Department in December 2023 to stop providing advice on planning consultations based on the standing advice, and instead to provide planning authorities with case and site-specific advice on a case-by-case basis until such times as a new ammonia strategy and updated standing advice have been agreed and are in place. The case-by-case approach developed by the Department retains use of the 1% threshold for significant effects, and in order to meet UK case law, includes a nugatory threshold below which projects would not be included in combination assessments to inform the NIEA's responses to planning consultations. This has been developed using the Joint Nature Conservation Committee's guidance on decision-making thresholds for air pollution. So I'll pause there and hope that that gives you a flavour of the work that the agency is taking forward and the issues that we're trying to address, and I'm now happy to take any questions.
David, thanks very much for that summary. We have a number of members looking to question. Just a couple from myself first, and it's on your last point around the ammonia standing advice and operational protocol. Explain to me again more detail. You said the department issued a directive, is that right? For use to stop using the ammonia standing advice and move to a case-by-case basis?
We went through a process in the department where, on the back of a legal challenge by the OEP, the use of the ammonia standing advice was examined and it was deemed not to comply with the legislation. So the result of that was, in order to ensure that we could provide advice in line with our statutory duties, that advice would be provided on a case-by-case basis, which met the requirements of the regulations.
So had OEP initiated a legal challenge?
And just double check with Mark and Sarah, but my understanding is that at JR we received a pre-action protocol.
My understanding when I met them, they said they were just carrying out an inquiry or an investigation.
No, we received a pre-action protocol letter that confirmed their intention to take a legal challenge.
Okay. And explain to us how you got from the figures of 1% loading on sites down to 0.08%.
Sarah, could I ask you to come on that one?
Yes, I think I just want to provide some reassurance that the 1% significance threshold still applies, and so it's whenever projects either on their own or in combination with others exceeds 1%, that significance threshold is still the same.
Explain that again, Sarah.
So the way it works is that we have to assess an application and we consider the process contribution that it would have to the nearby site based on the zone of influence. Previously, we would have just considered that project alone, and as long as it was less than 1%, we would have considered that it wasn't significant. The significance threshold still applies. That's whenever the projects in combination or on their own exceed 1%, that's when we would alert the councils that we would have some concern about the air pollution level. Where the 0.08% comes in is that, in line with the Wheeldon case, which was a significant EU piece of case law, we are not permitted to ignore the less than 1%. So they are used and calculated as part of the in-combination assessment, but the significance threshold still applies.
So that legal case, explain to me then how many of those cases that you currently have in consultation are likely to fall, within that 1%, or many are likely to fall within the 0.08%?
Well, I think there's a few steps that we go through. The 0.08%, which was based on a study that was carried out on behalf of JNCC, DEFRA and the other nature and environment agencies around what would constitute nugatory levels of emissions that below which would not require any further consideration. And so the worst case scenario, which is what we need to apply in line with the precautionary principle, is that 0.08% is the worst case scenario on that. We then take it a stage further, where we apply site-specific thresholds, which allows us to take into consideration the local environmental conditions and also the level of developmental pressure, because you have to take into consideration any other sources that are being considered and any other projects that are being considered as part of an in combination. So invariably, in many cases, the 0.08 threshold doesn't apply because in some areas there isn't the same developmental pressure. But where it does, we would just, rather than deem it to be significant in and of itself, we would just ensure that those projects above 0.08% or whatever the site-specific threshold is, would be included in any in-combination assessment. If after that, the in-combination, that source in and of itself, or other projects operating in combination with it, if that's over 1%, then we would highlight that as a concern to the planning authority. Given that for most of our sites, I think practically all of our protected sites are well above their critical load and critical level.
So working this into practical reality of what's happening at the moment, just reading correspondence that came yesterday or the day before, out of 94 cases that have been referred to you by council, agricultural cases, how many of those 94 consultations have you responded to? Because I notice 83 are outside the statutory deadline. So since this 0.08 or this change from the ammonia standing advice down to the case-by-case basis, how many have you actually responded to in that time?
I'd need to double check with colleagues, but my understanding is that we've responded to 30 cases in total at this stage.
Okay.
And that's over the last 12 weeks since the decision was taken on the 19th of December. But 22 of those responses required more information. Also important, they highlight, I don't think there's any additional information requirements as a result of the new process. So the information requirements and what we would require from applicants would still be the same.
So you've responded, and
Those figures right, Mark? Just
Yeah.
you've responded to 30, and is that a final response, or is that you're not seeking any further information? From them?
Chair, 22 of those responses are seeking further information.
So there's only 8 that has a final response?
As I understand it, yes.
Okay. And out of those 30 that have been responded to, how many of those then fall into that category where the 1% loading is still acceptable?
I don't have that information at hand, Chair, but we can come back on it.
Because what I'm trying to gauge here is if you're saying that this 1% loading is still an active number or guidance,
Significant.
then I'm keen to know how many still fall into that, or what percentage of the numbers of applications that's coming to yourselves still fall into that category, or how many now come onto that 0.08% loading.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Chair, if I
Yeah,
could maybe
sure.
explain. All of the cases will be considered in light of the 1% significance threshold. The additional step that we've had to add into the process is that we just have to consider those smaller emissions that we would have previously considered insignificant. We have to consider them in combination, and this is to allow us to afford the planning authorities, I suppose, robust evidence that allows them to make decisions on the basis of understanding whether or not there's the likelihood of adverse effect.
No, I do accept that, but I'm trying to establish how many of them actually get to that next stage of being required to have that further assessments of the 0.08, and how many are deemed acceptable and appropriate under the 1% loading. But anyway, you're coming back to us on that particular issue. On the issue of the number of, you did say you were 72% response to consultations, but obviously on agriculture consultations it's a lot different, whereby there seems to be almost 90% outside of the statutory deadline limits.
That would be for this group of cases, but
Yeah, that's primarily been caused by the pauses. That's primary reason for it. So we realise that there is a additional backlog with those cases.
Okay, and how quickly are you going to catch up with those?
at this stage it's difficult to say, but it is something that we're monitoring, and that includes in the next few weeks we're allocating
You're
additional.
monitoring?
well, we're allocating additional resources to help clear the backlog in the next few weeks. But in terms of how long it will take to get through those cases, it's difficult to say without being able to analyse and get into the specifics of each individual case. We wouldn't have that information at hand that would allow us to assess for these cases or for any of the caseload that we're managing, to be able to determine how quickly we can get through cases, because cases...
But you do appreciate the significant amount of finance that some of these individuals have put into these applications or businesses, and how long they have to wait because of a statutory agency can't meet the deadlines. So I have to say, I do need to impress upon you the huge frustration that there is out there in that wider agricultural sector at the delays that there are in this particular issue. So that's why I'm saying, I don't think it's... I'm prepared to accept it for now, that you still need to run your assessments on this, but we are going to be asking in the not too distant future about how long it's going to be until these can be cleared up and that backlog being caught up with. And I think that's been fair and reasonable from us.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Chair. And from our perspective, we do appreciate the length of delays that have been caused because of the way in which we've transferred from one process to the next, and with the pauses and everything else, which is why we're in the process of allocating additional resources, and we will keep the committee updated and informed. So we appreciate your patience in this as well.
One final point from me is on the ammonia strategy itself. Have we any idea when that's coming forward?
My understanding is that the plan for the ammonia strategy was that it was to be finalised at the end of March, but that would be our policy colleagues that are leading on that, our EMFG colleagues that were here last week. So I don't have an update in terms of when the strategy is due to go out to consultation, or sorry, when the strategy is to go to its next stages.
Okay, and the consultation itself, have you actually sat down with individual bodies to discuss the consultation? The likes of people who might be impacted, bodies who might be impacted, like the RSPB or Ulster Farmers Union?
That would be a policy-led matter, Chair. So from our perspective, we wouldn't be engaging with stakeholders in terms of the development.
Quite interesting. They passed a lot of things on to you from last week, and now you're passed it back to them.
We did notice, but look, Chair, apologies. I mean, look, what we can do is I can get a specific answer on that question. Okay. I mean, from our perspective, you know, as an operational delivery tool of the department, once the policy is developed and the strategy is put in place, then we'll carry that out, but we wouldn't be responsible for developing the strategy.
Okay, thank you. Declan?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I want to just pick up on the ammonia issue as well, because it is a very serious concern, particularly from the farming community. And I note from correspondence to the Chair, you know, that 25%, 21 of the 94 cases you have are actually in the one council area from Monoma district. So there are our constituents. So you can imagine that we are getting it. A lot of representation from farmers who find it bizarre that they want to invest in improving their buildings to reduce their ammonia emissions, but they can't do it because of the revised thresholds, which seems like a bit of a contradiction. Yep. And the other point or two again, which relates to, I'm just thinking of our district as well, is the fact that, you know, that we do have a lot of ASSAs. Where mostly from Anna and West Rome would be a lot of it would be marginal lands. We do have a lot of SSI, so obviously this ammonia is going to become a bigger impact. That also brings with it an equality implication as well. You know, obviously this decision was made without thinking of the equality implications for the demographics that people live in that district, and also the fact that we're right on the border. You know, we're right on the border where you could have a situation where ammonia produced in the southern side could come across, because there are farms which are right on the border. So how has all of that been factored into the decision making around the thresholds and the new upcoming strategy?
First off, Declan, in relation to the point that you raised in relation to the contradiction, I totally understand the frustration that must cause, because the committee has expressed concerns in the past. where development is a replacement and can deliver reductions. It seems counterintuitive to advise against such a development. But the difficulty that we have is any advice that we provide has to be in line with the regulations, and the regulations don't give any scope for us to consider any difference between new and replacement developments. So on that basis, we're bound by what we're required to do in relation to legislation, but we do totally understand the frustration that must cause. All public bodies have a duty to avoid deterioration and to protect our suite of protected sites. And in relation to ammonia, what that basically means is that we're required to reduce levels of ammonia emissions, the levels which avoid deterioration. So, I need to emphasise that point around the legislation, not distinguishing between different types of development proposal. And Sarah may want to add to this, but I mean, when considering a new or replacement development, public bodies must be able to demonstrate that ammonia levels will remain at or be reduced to levels that don't cause any further deterioration. And that's effectively why we're in this position, that we can't distinguish between the two. In relation to the equality impact assessment of the original decision that was taken to move away from the operational protocol, you're absolutely right. At the time, the department did not consider equality implications on the basis that the decision was taken in the public interest with the view to ensuring that we were fulfilling our statutory obligations. We've subsequently checked with the Equality Commission and confirmed that that was wrong, and an equality impact assessment is currently underway, but that process is not yet completed, but it should have happened at the time, so that was a mistake on our part. In relation to the issue around emissions coming from the south, I have to be honest, it's not one that I've considered personally, and it's not one that I'm aware of, and I'm not sure if Sarah or Mark would want to add anything to that.
Yeah, well, we would engage with our counterparts in the south who are also reviewing their permitting and thresholds and approaches to assessing pollution. Again, because we're all bound by the same international transboundary air pollution requirements as well. So there would be some, due to the prevailing winds, there would be ammonia emissions coming across the border, but equally our ammonia emissions reach England and Scotland. So it is a transboundary issue. I suppose just with respect to Fermanagh and Omagh, we do work very closely with the council there, who are very vigilant in ensuring that their protected sites are safeguarded and are very conscious that that particular district is incredibly important for its terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity, all of which are at risk from, I suppose, all levels of nutrient pollution, but particularly from air pollution. So in terms of replacements, we do engage a lot with the councils on this and with consultants, because ultimately we do want to ensure that the councils can authorise facilities and projects that in and of themselves won't continue to harm biodiversity and the sites. So we would need to see, and they would need to see, sufficient reductions that would align with achieving the conservation objectives to get down towards critical levels and loads. Most of our protected sites are so significantly exceeded in terms of critical levels and loads. We do need some significant levels of reduction, but again, that does depend highly on the original farm itself and the emissions that we're already emitting, and also the proximity to the sites, because the impact diminishes with distance.
Just very briefly, Chair, one point if that's okay, and this will be the last one. I just want to pick up again on the cross-border dimension, okay? And my understanding is that in the southern side, they operate the higher loading threshold than we have here. Well, surely that is seriously detrimental to farmers who live in the vicinity of the border, and indeed for farmers here in the north who want to invest as well. And we met farmers who have missed out on grants for investing in their buildings because of the threshold. So surely there's two things. If you live close to the border and the southern side operate the higher threshold, then surely to God there's a possibility that then could impact on farmers just on the northern side who are neighbours, and also it would have a detrimental impact for farmers who wish to invest in their business as well.
I mean, in terms of how applications on this side of the border would be assessed, I'm assuming that emissions coming from the south would have to feature in the combination assessment. So I think your assumption, Declan, there, I would guess is right, but I would ask Sarah just to double.
Yes, there's a requirement for us to consult for any transboundary effects. So counterparts and authorities in the Republic would also consult us, and vice versa. It is also understood that we also contribute ammonia emissions and nitrogen deposition in the other direction as well. But again, both the EPA and the councils themselves and National Parks and Wildlife Service, who are our counterparts, are significantly tightening up on this, because there's been even greater. They wouldn't just have the same levels of exceedance that we would have at site level, although they're seeing it starting to go up. So they're all tightening down significantly on their thresholds, because ultimately they don't want to undermine the delivery of their conservation objectives.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Nicola?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the four of you for coming in this morning. Just picking up on points that Declan and Tom already made about the ammonia strategy and that there and those issues. I just want to echo, like, there are deep frustrations with farmers locally, especially those that are trying to, you know, improve, become more environmentally friendly, improve air quality and reduce their ammonia emissions by upgrading their farm buildings, and then so it's this kind of catch-22 situation where they're trying to do that and then they're being prevented. So that really does need to be addressed, and certainly in our type of areas, in rural areas and border counties, like, it is a massive issue for our farmers. So there needs to be some kind of resolution to that very quickly. I'm going to move on to another topic though, and that's about, you'll have seen it on the media recently, and that we actually had a protest in Stormont on Tuesday by the Cabra Concerned Residents Agency, and that's about the Northway mushroom factory and the horrendous smell that's been coming from the factory for the last number of years. And obviously the residents have created this here group to do their best to come up with some sort of solution, because it really is impacting their lives on a daily basis. Even when the local primary schools, children there aren't able to very often go out to play or actually go outside for normal activities. Obviously there's queries around the health implications on all the local community. Like, the only thing I can kind of compare it to is the smell of slurry that you get, which is a very temporary kind of thing, but you know the frustrations that come with that there. They're even commenting on the media how they can't put washing out and stuff like that there. But this is a long-term thing, a daily thing, has been ongoing, and they are very concerned about the ongoing the health concerns that come with it as well. So I want to ask you, first of all, are there any mitigations against the likes of these odours and air pollution when it comes to the planning process in sites like this here? Do you have any mitigations that need to be put in place before a site can be passed?
On the specific regulatory requirements, I'll ask Richard to come on there.
Okay, so thanks for the question. On the planning side of things, we wouldn't have an input other than a consultee on that, and planning requirements would be stipulated by the planning authorities. We do have an ongoing input into both the site, and we've met with the Residents Association on a number of occasions, and the team are continuing to engage with them very regularly. The site itself was subject to an enforcement notice earlier on in 2023 in relation to odour, and we are working with both the site in order to ensure that they are meeting their regulatory requirements to the extent of their permit. That will mean that there isn't a zero level of odour even under the permit conditions, but my team are there very regularly, ensuring that they are monitoring the situation and identifying if there are any non-compliances that would occur. Not for me to present information in relation to the company themselves and the steps that they have taken, but they have taken steps to upgrade their systems, and again we are monitoring that very closely to ensure that there is progress with that. So we are also engaging very closely with the local council, and we have also had engagement with the Public Health Agency on this matter as well. So yeah, we are as an agency working our way through the remit or the powers that we have in this situation, and to ensure that the facility are remaining within their permanent and regulatory performance, but also continuing to engage with local residents as well as we can.
Well, I appreciate that, Richard, and I appreciate that there is that ongoing engagement with different organisations, but the company themselves may well be making steps and trying to improve it and trying to decrease the smell, but like you've seen from the protest last week and from different media reports, it's getting no better. In fact, the local community are getting more frustrated because changes aren't happening. So we really need to see some immediate changes there to improve their day-to-day life within the area. So I do think that's a really pressing matter. I know you mentioned they're working with Mid Ulster Council too, and I know that our councillor there, Gildernew and Colm Gildernew, have raised this issue a lot too, and have done a lot of work on the ground there. So I would hope that you'd be able to tie in with them as well and like support them in trying to do the best for the local community, because it is it's really devastating for them on a day-to-day basis, as I say. But I do appreciate that answer.
Just to reassure you again, we are very focused on this issue. We are meeting with local political representatives very shortly on this, and again, we will be going to the furthest extent that we can within our remit on this to move it forward, and to see, we do not want to see an environmental impact and a public health impact, and we'll work with our partners to do our best to move that forward.
Appreciate that, Richard. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
John Blair.
Chair, thank you, and I'd like to tell everybody at the agency it's good to see them here today. I want to go back to the comments made earlier about, as part of the presentation, habitat loss, invasive species, and the effect of all of that on our natural environment. And I suppose I'm addressing the wider environmental brief of the committee, and doing so mindful of, first of all, what seems to be the disproportionate amount of time I've spent on pollution of our waterways in particular, but also our land on occasion since I became an MLA. And thank you, by the way, all of you, for your regular responses on these matters. But thinking of that ongoing contact on matters around pollution, and also the fact that the Minister has announced a review of environmental governance within his department. Can I try this morning to get a picture from you of what systems are in place there for environmental protection and limiting environmental damage? And I suppose to be specific, the agency which has a legislative duty, statutory duty to licence waste management, water discharge, whatever it might be, is also pursuing the pollution incidents. And I'd like to know, I suppose, in summary, do you have systems in there to advise the department? Do you try to shape the policy using any of your business areas? Or is that simply coming from the department to yourselves to implement?
I think the first thing I would say, John, as a general point, is we do have a level of operational independence within the agency that allows us to design our own systems in terms of how we tackle some of these things, but that will always be based on the overall strategies and the legislation that are in place. In terms of advising the department on the development of policy when key policies are being developed, such as the NAP review as an example and things like that, then we would feedback in terms of personal experiences within the agency, and those issues will be factored in the wider reviews within the department. I mean, there are a number of policy reviews ongoing within the department, and I mentioned some of them in terms of the NAP review, the River Basin Management Plan, the work that's been taken forward in relation to the water quality issues in relation to Loch Ness. And we, as an agency, would play a very active role in providing advice back to the department on those issues.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. And you'll understand what I'm trying to do there, shape what you're feeding to the department and providing in terms of information and advice. Separate one, the marine plan Can I be given any indication of where we are with that? Is that still awaited, or has it been implemented?
The marine plan, as far as I'm aware, sits with Marine and Fisheries Division within the department, but I have to apologise because I'm very recently in post, so I'm not. It's just something I'm not familiar with. But
You won't be bringing that
We
forward. It'll be the department
it would
specifically.
be
Okay.
Marine and Fisheries Division.
Yeah, so our kind of biodiversity equivalents, but in the Marine and Fisheries Division would be involved in the marine plan.
Okay, thank you.
But we do have a very significant role in relation to fresh water. I think it's fair to say.
Okay,
Ms. Joe?
thank you.
All right, Patsy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you for presentation today. Just to sort of tease out the issue of enforcement around that Cabra mushroom plan. Who's the enforcement being explored by? Is it yourselves, or is it the council, or both?
Well, speaking on, sorry, Dave.
No, you work on it.
Speaking on our own behalf, yes, ourselves, we have our own regulations to enforce
It's to
in
do with the
relation to
licence.
that. But the council, my understanding, the council also have their own regulations and also the planning conditions as well.
That's grand, thank you. Going back there to a number of the consultation issues, I was looking at these last night, and this is the plan consultation issues, and some of them go back to, I'm looking here, July, May 2020, March 21, June 20, September 21, January 21, May 21, June 21, and there's one at Darien Strabane there, Strabane 20. First thing is, looking at those, why haven't they been brought to a conclusion? Either, in other words, to say, no can do, or because there's only so many times I'm sure you as public servants can say, we require further information. Anything like that, and you outlined earlier there, David, the 21, 30-day turnaround, like that's run into 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, the 21 30-day turnaround, Patsy, would be based on our provision of advice on planning consultations, but on those specific consultations, I'm not sure that the delay is on our side.
No,
They
no.
might be with the council.
Those specific consultations were planning consultations we received. There were actually consultations about the appropriate assessment that the planning authority had undertaken, and they had sent the appropriate assessment to us to say, is this appropriate assessment outcomes suitable? Now at that stage, some of the councils had received their own sort of legal advice that indicated that our own ammonia standing advice was vulnerable, so they said that they would not apply our standing advice, they would apply a more strict criteria, and that's what they applied to their appropriate assessments. So essentially they were coming to us, asking us to almost sign off their appropriate assessments using a higher threshold than we had in our standing advice. And that caused the difficulty that we were kept on going back and saying, no, this is our standing advice is as it is, and we weren't in a position to be able to go back and verify how appropriate their assessment had been. So all of those cases you're referring to were cases where the councils had applied a stricter threshold than was in our standing advice.
I'm kind of lost there a wee bit. Verify how appropriate it was.
Yes.
Verification comes about as a result, to my mind anyway, maybe from up the country or something like that, but it comes to yes, no, or maybe.
Yes.
And you can only say maybe so many times.
Yes.
So at what point do you say yes or no can do?
At that point in time, officials were instructed to provide advice based on the standing advice that was the department's standing advice at the time. So officials were not in a position to vary from that and actually approve or agree with an assessment that was undertaken using a stricter threshold.
But I'm still coming to the point, if it's dithering about this long, like coming on 4 years, there comes a point where you have to say, look, this is in our books, folks, we have to decide this is a yes or a no.
The previous minister had indicated to those councils that they could proceed to determine without further information or advice from the department in relation to those cases, but that determination didn't actually happen.
Yes.
And I suppose just on that, I think then subsequently we will now be reviewing those ones
Right.
in light of the case by case.
All right, okay, thanks for that, sir. Just if I could ask then, perhaps I'm not going to miss the one about Loch Ness, and you referred to it there, David. Could maybe just deal with, I suppose, because they're a wee bit of a collegiate, the River Basins Management Plan, Water Quality Management, and then you referred to the Emergency Preparedness Group. If we could just find out a wee bit of how those, the first two contributory factors, the River Basin Management Plan, Water Quality Management Plan, how those will impact upon basically Loch Ness or the short or long term. And then you referred there also to an Emergency Preparedness Group. If you could give me some sort of insights as to do what, there's you suggested protocols, but protocols kind of is a document to me. It's just actions, I suppose, that people are looking for at this stage.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of the operational protocols that are being developed and will be tested by the end of April, the purpose of that is to make sure that we're in a position where we can better respond to issues as they arise, and that will include better communication with councils, better communication with stakeholders, and basically providing better information as well. I mean, in terms of being able to deal with blue-green algae, I suppose the steps that we will have to kind of go through this year will be identifying it, having appropriate monitoring in place to be able to identify it, and then ensuring appropriate signage goes up whenever it's required. But in terms of actually being able to do things that remove the algae and stuff like that, that at this stage...
Well, that's a longer term thing. You know. But I'm just even thinking of how you attend to incidents of it, because I think maybe last year as these incidents of the stink of the stuff were reported, I think maybe there's how should we call it, a bit of a slowness there by way of response, not exclusively by the department, but by agencies that would have a remit towards it. So at what point do we get some details as to what the Emergency Preparedness Group, what their line of actions will be, aside from the comms, which you would expect anyway?
Yeah. My assumption is that if we're in the process of testing arrangements between now and the end of April, we should be in a position to be able to publish those protocols during April, or definitely by the end of April. And that should provide more information in terms of how the groups are going to...
I'm not trying to put you in the spot now, so you'll know a wee bit better, there'll be more meat on the bones by April then, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Right, well, we can probably come back to that. Now, just two quick questions then. The biodiversity decline and the contributory factors, you referred to that, and designation of sites. First of all, in regard to support for landowners by way of grants and the likes of that, I think that would be very important, especially with obligations around climate change legislation and the likes, aside from the biodiversity element of it too. And then finally, Chair, the issue of the fraudulent soil sampling. I know that it has come up at some councils around this. Where does the legal duty around that, the investigation fraud has been proven, then the implications of that for, say for example, plan permissions that were granted on the basis of fraudulent information and samples that were provided to NIEA. Has NIEA taken a position on that as to what next steps are?
Yeah, I mean, for do you want to come on, Richard? I mean, my assumption... No, go ahead.
I'm happy to do it. In relation to the whole area of the soil sampling, there certainly is an ongoing case running, so we're a little bit, would be constrained in relation to the allegations on that. However, we are certainly considering any of the, for example, we have both a statutory role and a direct role. So the direct role here is that we have issued permits and licences on the basis of nutrient management planning.
Yes.
So we have been reviewing those that are under our direct control. And in certain instances we have had refreshing of those results, etc., in relation to the licences and permits. The other element which relate to planning applications are really for the planning authorities, and we will continue to work with them, engage with them, and give advice where we can in relation to the steps that they may wish to take for that. And that might mean reconsultation, for example. But again, I would stress that there is a live criminal proceedings on this, and we are a little bit constrained around that.
Okay, right, thank you for that. And then the biodiversity issue, whoever takes that one. Support for farmers.
Yes, in relation to support, Patsy, in relation to support for farmers in relation to biodiversity, I'm not sure the extent of what our plans are at this stage, but I know in relation to the future agricultural programs, we would expect to see significant investment through farming with nature to support biodiversity and other environmental measures. There are potentially things that we can do in around the Environment Fund, but beyond that, I'm not sure there's much else at this stage.
Yeah, I think we've worked closely with our Food and Farming Group colleagues in the development and design and implementation of the Environmental Farming Scheme. And again, we will be engaging with them around providing the evidence and the necessary conservation measures for farming with nature, but also the evidence that allows them to really add value and make sure that farmers are getting paid attractively, and that there's sufficient incentives for managing biodiversity, both in terms of meeting biodiversity goals and the Environmental Improvement Plan targets, but also equally the biodiversity targets and nature-based solutions targets that are in the Climate Change Act.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks very
Patsy.
much.
William
Thanks,
Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're welcome along. And there is quite a bit of confusion on the ground. I have constituents ringing me. I'm ready to put an application in. It's going to cost me 10, 12, 15,000 pounds. Should I do it? Should I not do it? Because what we're getting back, a letter back from yourselves told us that each application's viewed on a case-to-case basis, but I would have thought that was always the case. That would always have to be the case, I would have thought. But in relation to loading of the change in 19th of December to the loading of 0.08%, I think what you're saying today, that's for the ones within 7.5 kilometres of a designated site. Those outside that remit are still assessed at 1%, is that right?
Outside 7.5 kilometres, they're not within the sphere of influence, so they're not subject to any assessments.
Yeah, well, there is an area of farmland in Northern Ireland that is outside that 7.5 kilometres remit. So you're saying, what you're saying to me is that's still viewed at the 1% threshold. Those that are outside.
Those outside 7.5 kilometres are not subject to any air quality assessments, because we would consider that as unlikely to have an effect, so they would be screened out from the very beginning.
What percentage of applications do you get in that are outside?
I don't have the figure at hand, but I would imagine it would be very small, if any at all, because most, I think we've 98% of the land area in Northern Ireland falls within that 7.5 kilometre radius.
Less than 5% of Northern Ireland would be outside.
Well, in the fact, if an applicant is outside the 7.5 kilometres, he should be, I'm not saying encouraged, but he should feel content enough to put an application in.
If outside the 7.5 kilometres, yes, it wouldn't feature in an air quality assessment. Now, we can't comment on other planning issues that other planning authorities may want to consider, but from the point of view of air quality, the agency would not.
The other issue is, under permitted development, a farmer can replace something up to 500 square metres. For instance, if a farmer has an old silo in the Sleekin and it's 50 years there and it's under 300 square metres or 500 square metres, he wants to replace that. There's an issue with that.
I think there's a caveat in the permitted development regulations that would indicate that permitted development applies except where there's a risk to the European sites, SPAs or SECs.
Yeah, and if they're outside that, if they're outside the 7.5 kilometres.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
under permitted development, they're still okay to do that.
If it's well,
Outside the 7.5
yes,
kilometre.
from an air quality perspective, yes.
That's good to know that, because there is a lot of confusion on the ground.
Again, the one other perspective is that it would also, if they're close to a freshwater, whether it's
Lake,
a nutrient runoff for that, that may also apply. But from an air quality perspective, it wouldn't.
Do you say that you're putting more resources to try and get the terms of the backlog, but given that you have changed your loading to 0.08%, any of those are not going to go anywhere to this ammonia strategy in place? That's what we are told, isn't that right?
No, the 0.08% just means that those applications will be considered in combination. It doesn't mean that the 1% still remains as the significant threshold. It just means that we take account of more of those smaller developments in the in combination. That was one of the most significant flaws in our earlier standing advice that needed to be addressed.
0.08%, I presume very few of those applications that followed that remit would go anywhere.
But that's just on the first step.
If you fail at the first step, should you fail altogether? Do you know?
No, there's a number of steps. 0.08% is the robust evidence that we have that allows us to defend anything below that not having any environmental assessment and going through with respect to air quality. If it is above 0.08%, we then look at, and this is where we mean case by case and site by site basis, that we would then look at the local environmental conditions associated with that project and also the associated developmental pressures. If it's in an area where there's actually not a lot of planning development in place that would add additional nutrients, that threshold would rise significantly. And then after that, there would be an in combination where we're required to assess it alongside any of the other sources that are currently under development. And if in combination that is over 1%, then that would be flagged as a concern to the planning authority.
It might be useful just to add that there is opportunities after that, if it is flagged, that if there is additional mitigations that can be put in place to lower it, then that can be reconsidered. But that is one thing that we are getting applications in that don't have a lot of mitigations built into it. So, we'd be encouraging people to try and build mitigations in as early as possible.
Because we don't say this should be refused. We would say this needs further review and further consideration of mitigation measures. Because we're not, there's probably some, depending on where they are, especially if they're very close to a site, should be examining other opportunities for mitigation.
If an ammonia strategy is eventually put in place, hopefully sooner rather than later, does that mean you should revisit the loading criteria that you already have now? 0.08%.
No, it's our unless other evidence emerges. I think what the ammonia strategy will provide us with is for the opportunity for the actual action to reduce the emissions, and as emissions go down, particularly around sites, that offers room for development. I think the difficulty for us at the minute is that the ammonia emissions are still rising, which means it means more mitigation is required for individual applicants coming through. But as we start to implement the ammonia strategy along with policy colleagues, emissions will come down, there'll be less pressure on sites, and then it means there'll be more flexibility and room for development because there'll be environmental capacity. At the minute, environmental capacity is limited.
Okay, thank you.
Right, William, thanks. Michelle.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. We've been talking about Moboy for a decade, and I suppose that's a concern in itself. And you did reference the strategy, which is being developed or is close to being developed for a potential sign-off. Do you have a timeline for when that's likely to happen, and also an associated timeline with regards to the length of a consultation, and with a Fairwind, when we are likely to see some type of action with regards to feet on the ground for want of a better term, to get some sort of solution for that site?
Yeah, well, I mean, at this stage, Michelle, we're in the process of finalising the strategy for Minister's consideration. And once we're in a position to finalise the strategy, we'll be in a better position to then advise in terms of what happens next. I can't put a timeline on how long it will take for the department to finalise the approach with respect to allowing the Minister to form his opinion on it at the minute, but I would like to think that it shouldn't be too far away, but I can't put an exact timeline on it at this stage. Once we get through that process, my understanding is that we then go through consultation. Consultation, I would assume, would take in the region of 12 weeks. Then finalising the strategy, producing a final strategy, and then basically going through procurement processes or whatever would be appropriate. So at this stage, I can't give it a definitive timeline, but we are coming to a crucial point in terms of being able to finalise the strategy.
Okay, I suppose associated with that generally would be the whole issue around organised waste crime. Yes. And even the cross-border waste crime issue as well. And I suppose I'd really like you to sort of develop that a little bit more with me, with regards to your relationship with counterparts in the south, and also, if there is waste now in Northern Ireland, then how does that get repatriated if that's something which is still ongoing? And then generally, I suppose, the work of the Environmental Crime Unit.
First off, in relation to the repatriation of waste issue, you're not going to like the response, because I'm going to have to refer to my environmental policy colleagues in EMFG, because they have been taking the lead in that. Richard, I'm not aware of the agency having any involvement in that, but if I'm wrong, maybe you would want to come in there?
No involvement apart from just advice that we would give on the ground. So yes, you're right, that's been taken forward.
No, I am aware, because it was in EMFG before Christmas. I am aware of ongoing engagement with colleagues in DEFRA, I think it was at the time, but I would need to come back and confirm that. But in my time in EMFG from October to December, we had no engagement with colleagues in the south in relation to the repatriation issue, but we had been raising it with DEFRA, and hope to get support from DEFRA to pick it up again.
We pick that up again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. Some ambiguity about this last week, and maybe I've missed it again. Who set the loading figure? 0.08 or 0.1? Who set that figure? Was it NIEA? Was it the department?
That would have come from advice from the NIEA based on the JNCC's recommendations, and I can't remember the name of the report, sorry.
It's the de minimis threshold report for decision making on air quality. The 0.08 is what has been determined on the basis of evidence to be the level at below which there would be no environmental impact. So that is our worst case scenario, but we are still using the 1% as the significance threshold. So the 0.08 does not bar people from development. It is not a new significance threshold. It is a de minimis one.
So, and I think what Sarah was outlining earlier as well in relation to whenever we consider applications, whenever the application falls below the 1%, based on the development pressures that are in the area, that 0.08% is then increased if the development pressures in the area are considered to be low, and then that creates a certain amount of flexibility that can allow applications to progress. Would that be a fair enough summary, Sarah? Or
it just is the threshold below which we would determine that a source doesn't need to be considered in combination or in an assessment, which is a statutory obligation under the Habitats regulations. But it's one that was a piece of evidence that was needed by all of the agencies, because we can only exclude projects from consideration if we have scientific evidence to demonstrate that there would be the absence of adverse effects. So 0.08 is the worst case scenario, but we would then look at a site level to determine whether or not that source is significant enough to be contained within and captured within an combination, but it is not used as a significance threshold to determine whether it has an impact or not.
And I think it's important to note the source of that, the JNCC. They are a statutory UK government advisor group, so they do have that statutory weight behind them to be able to provide advice across the UK on issues like this.
The other issue with the agriculture applications appears to be the difference in opinion between NIEA and SES. NIEA can do their response, put it through, it's clear, ready to go. Yet SES then finds a difficulty with it somewhere or another, and it goes back to NIEA, and that goes back and forth 3 or 4 or 5 different times before it's even an agreement can be seen to be got on it. So, does NIEA have any or any talks or whatever with SES on these issues? Because there seems to be a huge disparity between the NIEA and SES on these issues.
And Tom, I have to confess that from my perspective, I didn't know that was an issue, so it's not an issue I was aware of. So
that's the issue that we're talking about. Those appropriate assessments that were undertaken, they were undertaken by SES on behalf of the council, so they were using a stricter threshold than we were at that time. So now we will be providing advice on their assessments based on the new approach.
And SES do have an obligation to give robust scientific advice to the councils that would ensure that they can make planning decisions that are not going to be subject to challenge. So they had some difficulties with our previous advice, our standard advice, which is why they were being more precautionary as the law requires. So we should see greater alignment now that we have moved to this new approach. That would have been the case up to now, but they'll be more reassured by the approach that we're now taking. So you should see less discrepancy between.
That's going to help to speed the process up a bit. How many more staff are you putting into the agriculture side of things to get these this backlog cleared up?
Currently, in relation to ammonia, we currently have 5 staff involved in the process, and we have 1 due to come in at the start of April. We're just finalising at the minute.
And we're redeploying.
We're redeploying.
A number of scientific officers. We're just confirming that at the minute from other teams to come in and help clear the backlog.
But I mean, given that that there were 5 people on the team, it will be a significant increase in the number of resources on there. Haven't nailed it down at this stage, but at the very least, I would expect to see 3 additional staff on there to help support clearing this backlog.
I think, David, it's also worth pointing out that we've been working very closely with, because we understand the time that it takes for trying out different mitigations and being in the consultation process all the time. So we've been working closely with DEFRA, JNCC and the other agencies in the air pollution group to develop a new online air pollution assessment tool, which would actually enable, it would be an online tool that would allow applicants and their consultants to play about with and tinker about with livestock types, housing types, different mitigations, along with all the necessary environmental data that would allow that type of analysis to be done rather than them always having to go through the system, which takes some time for then us to come back and say, no, it's not enough and we need more. So we're in the process of getting that finalised. Have been engaging with UFU and other stakeholders on that one, so we're hoping to get that piloted soon.
Thank you.
I should be adding a whole pile of new work actually to it, if you don't mind me saying so, as opposed to trying to streamline it. I can actually see it taking longer, but anyway. Just one quick one. You did say, David, about Mobile earlier. Did you say that you were taking a legal challenge?
There has been an ongoing criminal case, and I think that's been in place since about 2015. So we continue to pursue that.
Where is that at the moment then?
Richard, you're closer to DSO's advice in this, so just in case I say anything that could be prejudicial, I'm going to pass over to you on this one.
Sure, and obviously sensitivities around ongoing criminal proceedings. There have been guilty pleas of a number of the defendants, and that is now in a process of going towards sentencing and identification of the parameters around sentencing. So it's at that stage at this point.
Okay, thank you. All right, David, Richard, Mark and Sarah, thank you very much for your time and for your information. So look forward to getting you back in the not too distant future to hear further.
Thank you, Chair. And just as part of the conversation, I was wondering if the committee would find it helpful to have a more in-depth session on ammonia, and we could bring some of the caseworkers to provide a bit more information. I think it would be good as well from our point of view to be basically in a position where we could explain in a month's time, how far we've been able to get with the cases that we have. so that we can demonstrate some improvement in terms of getting that backlog down and addressing the frustrations that so many people are inevitably facing at this stage. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate
That's
it.
good, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, members, we now have the Forest Service coming in, and we can still take the presentations.
Yeah.
Afternoon. This afternoon.
Afternoon.
Okay, we'll move on. John Joe Boyle and Michael Fairgrieve, you're very welcome here to the committee, and obviously we look forward to your presentation on the Forest Service. So it's over to you, and I'm sure you'll take a few questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee the wide range work that we do in the Department's Forest Service agency. I kick off maybe just, if that's okay, with just a wee bit of background just to set the scene. Forest Service, we deliver in the agency the forestry and plant health functions on behalf of DERA. It operates as an executive agency since the 1st of April, actually 1998, and it was further classified then as a non-financial public corporation from April 2020. The work of the Forest Service is led by the Chief Executive, who happens to be me at this stage, and also the agency accounting officer delegated by the Permanent Secretary to look after the forestry functions and plant health functions here. So, due to its income generating capabilities, Forest Service is enabled then under the classification of a non-financial public corporation to build cash reserves, which provides for an ongoing programme delivery, and it mitigates market shocks as well. So, for an example, with a large part of our income from timber, for an example, and sometimes timber prices aren't as high as others. So building reserves allows us to smooth out those market shocks and continue to deliver a consistent service of other services. We achieve an income of around £12 million from all sources against our programme, and as maybe implied earlier there, quite a bit of that, 10 million of that is from timber production and timber sales. And of course we receive a subsidy then from the department to topping up the rest of our running costs. In terms of staffing, we're very much a multidisciplinary organisation with a dedicated workforce of just around 200 people, both from the forestry, the agricultural and industrial sort of technical and professional areas, and then obviously with the administrative disciplines as well, supporting the work that we do. Just a few highlight, maybe just a few benefits, key benefits that we like to set out from the forests. A few headline facts: we manage 75,000 hectares of public forest land. The total woodland area in Northern Ireland is about just less than 119,000 hectares at this point in time, which is about 8.6% of the land area. So we manage about 75,000 hectares out of a total of 119,000 hectares of forest area. The forest land and the biological assets, i.e. the trees on the land, they have a combined value as per our recent accounts, last year's accounts, of 600 million pounds. So that's about the value of the public forest estate that we manage. Some other key benefits: we supply timber, obviously, from sustainably managed forest to generate income. That the onward processing of that contributes 60 to 80 million pound to the rural economy, obviously at the local level. 24% of the forest estate is actually managed with biodiversity as a primary objective, as well as obviously the timber production side of the business that we operate. Our forests also provide and have recently, and I'll say a wee bit more about that maybe later, good opportunities for recreation development, tourism, health, wellbeing value. We at our most recent public survey, we have 9 million public visits to our forests annually, and that is estimated to generate a total visitor spend of 172 million per year. What those people spend in terms of their visit, and that includes, of course, the bit of lunch they buy in the shops and all that sort of thing. So that's a total spend associated with a visit to the forest, 172 million pounds. Working with councils and other partners has greatly enhanced the opportunities for recreation at many of our forests, and I'm sure many of you here today will be familiar with, in your local areas, familiar with some considerable improvements that we have had in our forest parks over recent period. Around about 30 million pounds has been invested in forests from various funding streams on the back of working with councils and other partners in the development of these facilities. Moving on then to some priority work streams and responsibilities that we have. The agency income, as I say, generating capabilities and the cash reserves, about 18.5 million pounds, underpin the forward planning and the delivery of business priorities and investments. So we can tap into our income generating capabilities and our cash reserves to be able to move with the changing priorities of government and the department in order to make sure that we deliver those things and can continue to deliver those things. So our priority work streams are aligned with the department's strategic objectives, typically as set out in sustainability for the future, DEIRA's plan to 2050 and its vision for green growth. And the agency's activity and work programmes support DEIRA's development of the Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan for the carbon budget period 23 to 27, which you will know is a requirement of the Climate Change Act. The primary contributions from forestry to the climate change agenda is very much associated with the increased rates of afforestation that are in the targets, and the restoration of peatlands that Forest Service manage some peatlands and also have trees on some peatlands as well. So the contribution from the forest estate will largely be about to the climate change will largely be about addressing the afforestation challenges that we have in there, and also the restoration of those peatlands. And that's within the land use change forestry sector is where that is. Just very quickly outlining our key responsibilities. To expand the forest cover in Northern Ireland, including taking forward the afforestation programme and that contribution that I've mentioned to carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. Another key responsibility is to manage the forest sustainably. And we evidence that on an annual basis through an independent professional audit against the UK Woodland Assurance Standard. And that includes managing the forest sustainably. Is probably easy to say, but it's quite a lot behind that. We supply timber as part of that sustainable management. We regenerate the forests in a way that delivers the environmental and the biodiversity objectives that we have, and obviously taking account of the carbon sequestration potential and the contribution that the forests are making to climate change mitigation and other ecosystem services. So there's quite a bit in the sustainable management responsibilities that we have. Continue to promote the public access by maintaining and improving our facilities across the estate, visitor service, and contributing to better opportunities and improved opportunities for recreation and tourism. And we operate an inspection and compliance and legislative controls programme in relation to our plant health responsibilities to make sure that our forests, our horticultural industries and our agricultural sectors are well protected from the introduction of pests and pathogens that could cause damage to that. Just to highlight a couple of key issues that the agency are obviously dealing with and working through presently is firstly the contribution to the Climate Change Act. And I've mentioned earlier that the main contribution is through afforestation and restoring peatlands. So the first challenge to highlight to yourselves is the afforestation challenge, and the challenge is to set it out is to increase the area of forests and woodlands. Is a focus of the department, and the focus is to reach 12% of the land area by 2050. And as I mentioned earlier, the current plantation area is 8.6% of land area is planted. So there's a considerable step up needed there to get to 12%. The forestation programme progressively increases the programme that we have and are feeding into the CAP. It very much has a progressively increased annual tree planting target, set to increase nearly threefold from the current 500 to 600 level we're planting at the minute per year, and set to increase to almost threefold that by 2030. And thereafter, 2030, to further increase again, that'll be needed to deliver the most recent Climate Change Committee recommendations of 3,100 hectares per year by 2035, and that 3,000 hectares of planting by 2035 to be maintained through to 2050. So to get to 12% from where we are, we need to gradually or progressively increase from 500-600 that we're at the minute to 1,500 by 2030, and then through to 3,100 hectares by 2035, and maintain that through to 2050 to get to 12%. So I'm sure you will see that's a significant challenge that we have in front of us that we're taking on. So due to the limited potential for creating this level of woodland on public land, then achieving the forest expansion targets will primarily depend on our ability to promote and encourage landowners to plant land and to put trees on land, create woodlands on land that is a lot of it that isn't currently in agricultural use. We're already working with stakeholders to consider how best to address the forestation challenge and how to ensure that we get the woodland expansion into the areas that we get the greatest benefits, including income to landowners and of course resilient and diverse and sustainable forests with the highest potential to respond to the impacts of climate change. How to contribute to protecting the quality of our waterways and integrate positively with agricultural land holdings and businesses. So we're very, very conscious that the increase in forests and the increase in creation of woodlands needs to be a very good fit with those agricultural holdings and businesses that are already occupying the land. We've seen a continued interest from landowners in increasing the forests in the current year. similar sort of levels as we've seen in previous years, recent years. But of course the department needs to, as I've said earlier there, needs to continue to increase that from where it is up to the levels that I've just indicated earlier there. And the department is currently finalising the necessary approvals for the forestry grant applications that we are holding for this year, and we hope to be able to issue the letters of offer as soon as we have the business case approval confirmed by Department of Finance. And the second main contribution to that climate change agenda is very much the peatland restoration issue. The CCC recommendations is that 23,000 hectares of peatland habitat is put on the road to recovery by 27. 1,500 hectares restored by 2050.
150,000.
Sorry, 150,000. Apologies, made that mistake. Thanks, Michael. With around half the forest area of land, the forest land on Northern Ireland is in peat. Some of these areas that are already forested will also feature in the peatland restoration programmes. Another key issue that we're dealing with just at the minute is in relation to the plant health side, and you'll be aware that the department implements its legislative responsibilities in line with the Windsor Framework agreed between the UK government and the EU. Forest Service has a responsibility for those official controls in respect of the regulated products at the Northern Ireland SPS inspection facilities. The Windsor Framework, it establishes that plants for planting seed potatoes and used agriculture and forestry machinery enter Northern Ireland from GB under a Northern Ireland Plant Health Label Scheme. If the goods are here on the UK internal market for use in Northern Ireland. And then of course other regulated goods that are for onward movement to ROI, they remain subject to the OCR requirements, including the phytosanitary certification requirements for that. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity just to set out some of the things that we do and an overview of the Forest Service. And I'll pause there and happy to take any members' questions from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John Joe, for that comprehensive review of Forest Service. Just a couple of queries from myself. You said you were planning, or the Forest Service were planning to treble the amount of tree planting by 2030. What makes you confident that you can do that, given that you haven't near met your targets in the last number of years?
Yeah, I suppose to answer your question, Tom, the chairman, the main thing is that we have to make sure that we have the target that we promote the woodland issue, that we promote the value of woodlands to landowners. And that's not to say we haven't done that, but we need to make sure that we promote it and that we incentivise that and that we target the woodlands. Key thing is that we want to target woodlands where they will obviously have the best effect as well, whether they fit into create opportunities, for an example, to landowners to create buffers between water streams and their farming businesses, etc. Things like that. That's what we need to do in order to target. What makes me confident? Your question about that we will be able to do that. We have set that target. You have mentioned that we've failed to meet our targets, and you're quite right. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've got quite a bit of target. We've got quite close to our target, but we haven't quite met the target. So we need to be in a position to step that up. And that is largely, as I say, has to be through promotion. It has to be through increasing the awareness of the value of trees to society generally. And of course, at the core of all of this is making it an attractive proposition for someone who owns the land. That's at the core of this.
How are you going to do that? Make it attractive?
So I mentioned earlier we worked with the stakeholders. We have got quite a bit of information coming through from stakeholders just now and in previous stakeholder forums in terms of the kind of things that need to be considered in terms of new grant schemes. For argument's sake, the new grant schemes will need to address things that are that we learn are some of the curtailing factors. Sometimes, I'll give you an examples of things that stakeholders are telling us is that the establishment grants, while they might be enough to encourage people to plant trees, the sort of a 10-year period for annual payments thereafter, it might not be long enough, and isn't sufficient to encourage people to make the change to plant trees. So those are the kind of things that we are looking at.
That hasn't been developed yet?
No, that's well, it's ongoing. That work has started, and I say we have the stakeholder stuff there, but it hasn't been finalised yet. No.
The land, the type of land that you can plant trees on has changed as well. 20 years ago you could have planted on, I suppose, what I would call lesser quality land, whereas now seem to have to go on much better quality land.
I think there's some decades ago, I suppose, there's quite, and I've already referred to them in the area of forest that we have on peatlands, for an example. For some decades now, we haven't been planting trees on deep peatlands. Land where there is a small layer of peat, perhaps in the upper horizon, then those may well be still fine for, and are still fine for planting trees on. There are also designation areas that are designated for environmental reasons, etc. And our grant schemes wouldn't support planting, or regulation wouldn't permit planting on areas that are designated for a particular environmental reason. So that rules out some land, all right. And then there are things like habitats, species-rich grassland, for an example. If there's an important species-rich grassland there, then that putting a forest there is going to deplete. Then there are issues around, or there are curtailing factors around planting trees and those. So I don't know if it's the. I think there's still I suppose lower productivity agricultural land is still very well eligible for planting. I think, but you're right in saying that those peatland sites, for an example, and any other designated sites that I've said, those sites wouldn't be available really. So
okay, thanks, John Joe. Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John Joe and Michael, for your presentation here. I must say I count myself very lucky that I was brought up right beside the Gortin Glens Forest Park in Omagh, and still make a lot of use of it. It's a really wonderful facility for local people. I know it's been recently developed by the Fermanagh and Omagh Council as well. They've invested a lot of money into it, and we've now got new bike trails, and I think there's even horse trails and that in it too. And it really is a brilliant service, for local people. But I wonder what kind of role you play and what engagement you have with the local council in ensuring its safety and ensuring that the facilities are maintained and that the services are there for local people, and it's actually one of the most well-used tourist spots at the minute across the north. So what you're doing to encourage people to come down to Omagh and to use the Gortin Glens Forest Park as well?
Yeah, well, I suppose in terms of the partnership thing the partnership arrangement that we have with the council, that first of all that is a key part of the catalyst in order to draw in the funding and the money to put the investment in there. So that's been quite pivotal to that, and the council have played a big role in doing that. And I suppose at the high level, the partnership that is there is that the council are operating the forest facilities, etc., on a daily basis. So they sort of manage that and do that on a daily basis. But they're not burdened with the management of the forest issues. They're not burdened with having to manage the trees, having to manage the forest, having to keep the woodland sustainable or anything like that. We pick that up as part of our side of the partnership arrangement there. And we meet the council very formally as part of our arrangement. We meet them twice annually, and we set out and we, I suppose, dovetail is a good word to use. We dovetail anything that would, for an example, a particular event coming up at Gortin or whatever, then we would perhaps plan a piece of forest operation, at a different time frame to avoid any controversy around that. So there's an ongoing partnership arrangement there, and we sort of look back every 6 months. We sort of look back at what we've achieved in that time and look forward for the next 6 months, saying what's coming up in the next 6 months and how do we plan that around to make sure it works for both parties. So there's a very good partnership working in that.
That's good, John. Well, it seems to be working well. As it is a very successful kind of location and base, so it does seem to be working well now. So long may it continue. I just want to ask then. I know that Ireland as a whole is one of the most deforested, it is the most deforested area in Europe. So can you explain to me what you're doing with your counterparts in the south to address that, essentially?
Yeah, well, with their counterparts in the south, they also have a very ambitious planting, afforestation programme in the same way as ourselves. So I mean, and we've always had a very good working relationship with them, but we don't actually share because we're in two different jurisdictions. We don't share the same grant schemes or whatever. So we've got our schemes and they've got their schemes, but largely they mirror each other. They're very very similar from that point of view. In terms of environmental, let's say issues, and Chair has mentioned things like about land, and I've responded along the lines of designated areas and all that. Similar designations apply in the south. So areas that couldn't be afforested in the south because of peatlands, for an example, or whatever, then they apply to ourselves here. We're very common on those things, and the afforestation, the standards with which which a new forest project or forest proposal, woodland proposal needs to meet is similar in the south and the north. We both our colleagues in the south and ourselves, we operate to international standards around forestry standards and what things have to be met to be delivering on those forestry standards. So we're actually both following the same standards in effect. Our delivery mechanism might be slightly different just because of jurisdictions and things like that, but largely we're both following the same standards.
Those standards do include an element of consultation with neighbours and coordination as well. So we've relationships with our landowning forestry neighbours that we can share forest management planning issues, and they share theirs with us as well.
That's very helpful, thank you. I have one more quick question, Chair, and that's just about indigenous species. I know there's in forestry, there's concerns around that there. What are you doing to develop indigenous only species or woodlands here?
Sorry, I missed a bit of the question, if you don't mind.
So I'm saying there's an issue here with the levels of biodiversity loss in Ireland, and particularly around indigenous species. Mm-hmm. So are you doing anything to actually, or is there any kind of approach in planting indigenous species specifically in woodlands? Mm-hmm.
Well, just in the last 2 years we have we actually particularly targeted native woodland tree species, and we put an additional grant scheme, a small woodland grant scheme, okay. And that's particularly targeted at indigenous species. That grant aid actually only grant aids native woodlands as opposed to more general. So that was added on. That's not to say, and just to be clear, even the forestry expansion scheme, which is the other sort of area, the other scheme that would be used for tend to be larger areas, even where a landowner decides they want to avail of a forestry grant, a forest expansion scheme that and decides they want to plant largely for timber production or whatever, that type of thing. Even that woodland, in order to meet the forestry standards that I've talked about earlier there, in order to meet all those standards, it has to include it must include those required elements of biodiversity and native woodland and diversity of species, etc. In those. So even the woodlands that are where the objective is largely about productivity, there are requirements for the right levels of biodiversity and the right levels of diversity of species to be in there, and our grant schemes make sure that that is the kind of woodland that needs to be proposed and gets funded through the grant schemes.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Patsy?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being with us here today. Just, John Joe, you referred earlier there to the target by 2035 of 3,100 hectares of planting.
Aye.
How much ground is available, well, preface that, how much suitable ground is available within your own remit for planting?
Aye, and yes, we deal with that on a regular basis, Patsy. The reality of it is we do have land that's not planted, so I mean, people will know that Forest Service own and manage land. We've 75,000 hectares of land that we manage. About 65,000 hectares of that is actually planted. The rest of the land will tend to be land that is in open moorland peatland that would be prohibited from planting, yes. Even by us or by anyone else. Even if it was someone else owned that, we wouldn't be allowing them to plant it for those environmental reasons, and other a lot of the so that difference of let's say 10,000 hectares that we have that's not planted. Most of that is not plantable, is not available for planting, yes. Because of it's in designated areas. It's either too high elevation that trees won't grow on. So we've actually, I suppose, a simple way to answer your question probably is we have actually, been exhausting and been very nitpicky in terms of how much more we can add on or how much more of the land we have can we plant, and we've largely taken that to its limit.
Just doing basic maths there. Mm-hmm. You're kind of running out of 3,100 acres or hectares there. Where are you projecting to get them from?
Well, that's where we will. That's where we'll need to encourage private landowners to plant the land on their land. That's not to say we wouldn't buy land. We have bought some land recently, and we still would buy land where particularly where it meets other perhaps objectives such as joining up woodlands or creating let's say corridors, wildlife corridors, that type of thing. So some of the land that we potentially could purchase can add, as well as creating an area of woodland, it can actually link up other woodlands to high value.
Really what you're saying is you're either going to have to acquire land, which can be tricky enough at times given the price of it, depending on where you are, or you're going to have reasonably incentivised grants to landowners to plant trees.
That's right, and the bulk of what is likely to be required. This is the likely bit. The bulk of what's going to likely be is going to be the second. Yes. Coming from agricultural land with the right incentives in order to encourage people to plant.
That has been the way for a while anyway, hasn't it?
But yeah, it has been that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's the incentivised bit is the key bit. I think that's the bit that you're going to have to do a lot of consideration to. Now,
there's maybe a point there, if you don't mind coming back, and there's maybe a point there worth sharing with the committee as well. The grant schemes that we offer now we're now at the stage, and that's what we're starting to look at here. We're now at the stage of moving out of the grant schemes that are being operated under the rural development programme. So now as we go forward from 24-25 onwards, the grant schemes that we'll be offering are ones that we will need to design that are both designed to meet the obviously the policy, the expansion policy, but also funded through national funds as opposed to largely through the European funds available. So no, we will be funding new grant schemes from national funds.
The key again is to make them worthwhile to the landowner.
That's right,
because they're not doing it otherwise. Just on that, and you took me into it, just was my head anyway. You mentioned there the amount of 10,000 hectares that you have, which wouldn't be suitable for planting, which is probably bogland or peat or whatever you want to call it. You also mentioned there the restoration of peatlands. Now, I'd raised this one committee meeting before. I'm intrigued as to how that's done in such a way as to sufficiently restore the boglands. So it might be useful or helpful at some stage. We've got a wee bit more detail around that, Chair. Just the practical way that's being done, or maybe even a visit at some stage.
Yeah, and
work that the department's ongoing or involved in.
And there would be no problem at all with the committee or representatives being provided with more detail on that at all. That land where you actually mentioned it as well, some of that land being on bog land, some of that land will be part of the contribution that we're talking about to be restored to contribute to the climate change. So as well as the department encouraging private landowners to put their boglands into a restored manner, or take their boglands into a restored manner, we will do the same on our public forest estate. So that 10,000 hectares will play a big part of the climate change issue, even though there's no trees on it. I suppose that's the easy way to say it.
Grand, so we look forward to hearing
Yeah.
about that too. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Patsy
thanks,
and
Chair.
Michelle.
Okay, thank you. And they're quite short questions, and thank you for your presentation. And Patsy's probably straight into where I was going in relation to whether you were actively, or SIB were actively purchasing land to plant in order to meet targets. But is that a programme that you have factored in, and you have costs set aside for that?
Yeah, in terms of the purchase of land, we still purchase land. As I say, we will have. We've purchased 3 farms in the west area this year round, and there's one or two other bits that we are in the process of purchasing. Not all in the west, I have to say. But we are purchasing some land, particularly those bits of land that are, I suppose, of high value interest to us, are those that are offer that strategic value of perhaps connecting up woodlands and doing other things like that. So those are particularly attractive to us. We're not always able to purchase land because of market prices, etc., or perhaps our business case for a particular piece of land doesn't stack up to pay the going rate for land. So there's sometimes we are interested in land, but we couldn't buy it because of other people who decide that, where it's more value to them than it is to the forestry programme. So we have to look at it all on a business case basis. So in overall terms, to answer your question fully, each of the sites that come available, and each of the sites that we take individually, we will look at those on a business case basis and work up the public value of bringing them into woodland. And as I say, some packages of land that are offered to us, or on the market to us, as well as that are offered to us. Those packages of land sometimes represent obviously different value than others, and we will pick them off on the basis of not so much on how much money we have available to purchase them, but if so it's not about the budget that we have to cover the purchase of them. It's about whether or not the business case actually shows a positive return to the taxpayer, really.
You're always actively looking
Yeah.
to expand.
Yeah, it's a sort of it's a continual process for us. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just in relation to the estate itself, and it's about, I suppose, encouraging renewables, and you've talked about some of that land. You can't plant trees because of the topography of it and so on too. So I suppose it's about looking at sort of the wind farm as an answer. Can you maybe talk to us about any strategy in relation to that?
Yeah. And that's part of, we have colleagues leading up on what's called a green growth strategy as well. We have a green growth strategy. We have colleagues leading up on that as well. And of course, where the forest estate can contribute to the development of then the forest estate will be available. Will be considered for that. It's probably worth just clarifying from the committee point of view that the forest estate, we manage that, and we deliver the duties under the Forestry Act, which is the 2010 Forestry Act, and that gives us an obligation and a duty to manage the land for forestry purposes, but it also gives us a power to use the land for other than for forestry purposes, provided that we take due account or give due regard to the forestry aspects that we're delivering. So there's nothing to say that the forest that we can't place turbines, for an example, into forest areas, provided the management of that forest area and the management of our overall estate isn't prejudiced from a sustainable forestry point of view. So it would be probably unrealistic to think that the forest estate could be potentially wiped out and we put turbines on there instead, because obviously we would not be fulfilling our duty on the Forestry Act. But the both things can work in hand.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Chair. Declan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Thanks very much for the presentation. Very helpful as always. The couple of things I just want to mention there. You just said that, John Joe, that we're coming out of the EU Rural Development Programme grants and moving into our own schemes, which obviously is a consequence of us leaving the EU. But there's forests, for example, in our own constituency of West Tyrone, like Killeder, for example, which just goes right across the border. There's no border. There is a border, but there's no border as far as the planting is concerned. So, I just think that, I'm sure you would agree, that it'd be important that whatever schemes we do here needs to be in sync with whatever schemes or culture or whatever the corresponding body is in the south to manage forests such as that there. That's the first point. And the other thing I want to say is I think that sometimes we look at it as agriculture, land and forests as if they're separate. Has there been any, or maybe it's perhaps not even suitable here, thought given to schemes like the silvopasture that you would get in other parts of the world, where you could integrate your trees with your grazing ground? So you're not taking grazing ground out of production, but you're still increasing your coverage.
There's sort of 2 points in there. Firstly, yes, you're absolutely right. There's quite a lot of our forests just simply straight into forests in the south, and we just mentioned earlier there, but we didn't elaborate on it. The consultation that we do in terms of forestry planning and with our colleagues. So that consultation also includes consultation with the culture forests in the south as well. In terms of what their plans are, because we actually need to join up the sustainable management of, if you want to call it, the forest in the landscape, regardless of where my bit ends and where their bit starts. So we wouldn't, for an example, have a harvest and replanting programme to the edge of our bit in the same day or week as somebody else is doing a similar on the other side. So we will make sure that we stagger that and dovetail that and replant the areas in the same way, so that we are always creating that gap of and there is standards around 7-year gaps between consecutive clear fell groups and things like that. There's standards around all of that, so we make sure those things are all dovetailed with the people in the south as well. And you're up in terms of the grant, in terms of expanding more woodlands. The same challenges are in the south as we have here in terms of the grant support and in terms of bringing land forward for planting. So yeah, absolutely need to stay joined up in all of that. The second part of your question was that has been something that has been actually quite a bit of work done by the department over a number of years around tree planting and still using the land for grazing, and there's benefits and value around that. Some of the values are, for an example, that the trees will create the underlying soil and a bit drier than if the trees weren't there. So they will dry out some of the moisture in that, and that can help for a whole lot of things, such as the length of grazing. So you could perhaps have animals grazing on a site where there are trees for a much longer part of the year, and also that removes the need for them to be, let's say, housed for 6 or 9 months of the year, or whatever it happens to be. So you could possibly use the land and keep the cattle on the land for much longer because of the presence of the trees there. So then there's the shelter issues as well. The shelter issues around that as well. So yeah, absolutely, grant schemes need to look at and will look at all of the different options for trees going on land, and then how those different bits are. Not all land is suitable for both of those things, like trees and livestock, but some land, soil types and slopes and other things like that are very suitable. So it's important to pick up where both of those things can work well together.
Okay, thanks.
Just one
Right,
final thing.
sorry.
Just I'm not going to hog it anymore, but Nicola mentioned about the benefits. Gorton Lane's huge community benefits and great partnership working between yourselves and the council and others. And I know that I've been involved and attended a number of consultations in the last couple of years on the potential of Altmore and Dunmoyle forests being developed. Do you know if there have been any further consideration of that, or perhaps that's you maybe don't have updated information with you?
Yeah, well, I think, again, we're totally open to developing those areas. Absolutely. We haven't got a project or a proposal at that stage at this Declan, but certainly we're very much willing and open to facilitate that. Probably be a different kind of project than at Gorton, but that's every forest has usually got its own sort of characteristics, and you want to exploit whatever's there naturally and whatever the forest can offer, and not all forests will offer the same thing or the same scope for the same thing, but all the forests can offer something in that regard, and that's what we want to exploit and take forward.
Yeah, thank you, Jojo.
Thanks. William, do you want to?
Thank you. Just more or less a comment. I can say Gosford Forest Park in Market Hill is a very well used facility, and it's actually an excellent facility and well used. In relation to the tree planting of the 1,100 hectares by 2035, you said it was a significant challenge. I think it's an almost impossible task, but wish you well with that. But I do think, in relation to a business case, price of farmland in Northern Ireland, I don't think a business case will ever stack in relation to the price of the farmland, the cost of farmland today. Even for a farmer to buy it, it doesn't stack, but the farmer doesn't do a business case, the farmer who on buys it anyway. But I'm only saying in relation to encouraging landowners to plant trees, it's going to take something fairly significant, because land's at a premium in Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's our view, Willie. We share that view absolutely. The likelihood of the public sector actually being in a position to, I'm not talking about necessarily the funding issue, but being in a position to purchase the land and plant it is less likely than encouraging people to plant land and still own it. I think a key thing is even as offering people the opportunity, the landowners, the opportunity to, if they want to, for argument's sake, take a little bit of a step back or reduce their farming, or a bit of retirement type considerations or anything like that there, then if we can offer them the incentives that encourage them to actually plant the land up and they still own it, it's still their asset. And I think there's actually a point that hasn't come out yet, which maybe worth sharing with you as well, is the value of the woodlands. We've seen land that has been put into woodland very significantly increasing its value because as the trees grow and as they get to let's say a harvesting stage or whatever, then they become a very lucrative kind of investment. They're very steady. They're not the biggest investment. You could probably invest in other projects on a global scale that would give you maybe a bumper return for a couple of years, but there may be higher risk. The woodland is a very steady and very almost very sure increase in the value. So someone who potentially, this is an example off the top of my head, someone who potentially wanted to downsize or stop farming the outlying farm or whatever it happened to be, if they decided that they wanted to plant that land but still hold it for their heirs and successors, etc., still hold on to it for that, then what they're actually handing over to those people would be very much more value than what they after they put trees on it than before. So I think the valuation and that increase in value, but it takes time. It takes a bit of time. So you have to make the investment up front, and that comes back to the point that we're talking about, the sort of any of the sort of annual payments that would go into supporting the trees in the first period of time, up until a point of time where the woodland value would have increased sufficiently to make that an attractive proposition in itself. There are more landowners now realising that that this is a good investment, even though it's not a high annual income. It's still a good investment. So there are people in that space at this point in time, and we have to capture all those thoughts in terms of our new incentive schemes.
You're going to need quite a few of those people.
I know. It is a challenge. It is a huge challenge. The amount of woodland that we need to get in order to get to the 12% is a huge challenge.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, John, Joe and Michael, for that. Do appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you in the future as well.
It's great. No, thanks for the opportunity to present the case for the forestry case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.
Okay, members, we'll continue with agenda item 8, which is correspondence. Correspondence commences at page 155 in your pack. I'll just run through a few. If there's any you want me to stop on or go back to, please let me know. I'll refer you first to pages 161 and 162 of your pack. It's correspondence from Mr. Andrew Agnew, Algae Weed Control Limited, regarding the issues in Lough Neagh, and some suggestions. This must have come through Patsy maybe, was it? Can I suggest that maybe this is sent on to the department for their information? Is that reasonable?
Thank
All
you.
agreed? Okay, and correspondence at page 163 to 166 from Jennifer Halliday, Senior Director of the Competition and Markets Authority. The representative here in Northern Ireland is Louise Close, who you may have met in her previous role as engagement team at the Assembly. Are you content to note this and add the organisation to our draft forward work programme to meet?
That'd be helpful, Chair, because I see they had, I didn't get reading it, but I see they had through the week there, they provided a report that is about veterinary products and the likes, and I think that'll be very helpful to us.
It did indeed, yes. Yeah. So you happy that we add them to our forward work programme?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Page of 167 to 242 from the Department regarding the launch on the 7th of March of the Rethinking Our Resources, Measures for Climate Action and a Circular Economy in Northern Ireland consultation. Consultation closes on the 30th of May 2024. Are you happy to get an update when the consultation closes, or do you want any to meet beforehand?
It might be useful to have a briefing on that, if that was possible
Okay.
to do. It might then be able to inform then responses.
Okay, happy enough with that? Members happy? Okay, thank you. Okay, members, page 243 of your pack is from Sharon Werner, President of the North of Ireland Veterinary Association, requesting an informal meeting. She raised a number of issues of concern regarding access to veterinary medicines after 2025, which is a massive issue that most of us will be aware of. You content that we initially have that informal meeting and put it onto the work programme? Thank you. Correspondence on pages 256 to 258 of your pack from the Assembly's EU Affairs Manager, Shauna McGeehan. We wrote to Shauna on the 26th of February to clarify the role of the committee regarding copied correspondence on the Windsor Framework. Ms McGeehan highlights the House of Lords European Affairs Subcommittee were appointed to consider all matters relating to the Windsor Framework, including scrutinising EU legislation applying to Northern Ireland. The subcommittee will likely continue to copy the correspondence it sends to the Government on a range of EU issues to the Assembly's statutory committees. As with any correspondence, it is the committee to decide how to deal with it. For example, in seeking information from the Department on the issue. Ms McGeehan also stated that it is not possible at this stage to quantify the expected volume of such copied correspondence from the House of Lords European Affairs Subcommittee. In your correspondence today, we have received 4 letters dated the 7th of March, copied to this committee from the Chair of the House of Lords Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework. Is the committee agreed that we consider it on a case-by-case basis? It's impossible for us to deal with all those bits of correspondence, members, unless you feel that we have to, but it's a huge volume of stuff. Could I suggest maybe that members look at it individually each week, and if they have an issue to bring forward, same as we've had in the past with some issues, if you bring it forward and seek us to maybe get more information from the department or whatever, as opposed to just going through each individual. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the letters that are in place today, has anybody seen anything significant in those? I haven't anyway. No? Okay. Page 1255, in your pack, regarding a letter from Minister Muir to McNamee Donald solicitors regarding Lough Neagh. Minister Muir states he will continue to engage with all partners and stakeholders. This correspondence has also been copied to the First and Deputy First Ministers. I'm assuming you're content to note that, or is there any further involvement you think we need? No. Examiner of Statutory Rules, the 4th report is in table papers 25 to 32. The report includes SR 2024-31, Farming and Generation Scheme Amendment Regulations. We've considered this SR last week and no objection to the rule. So can we note the Examiner of Statutory Rules report? Thank you. Correspondence from Dahi McKay of the RSPB at pages 33 and 34 of your table papers regards to major project at Dungannon Reservoir in County Antrim. Do you want to add that to potential lists of visits that we'll look at?
Yes, please.
Okay. Draft forward work programme. Next week we have Ulster Farmers Union and Northern Ireland Environment Link and the Office of Environmental Protection. Also our last meeting before Easter recess. Proposing that the first meeting after the Easter recess we have a pre-strategic planning day briefing from the research group, Mark Allen and Susie Kiev. They've been doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes, so we're happy to have that briefing from them. Have we any other business?
Can I raise just an issue?
Yes,
I'm not sure. I had as you're aware, the flooding issue affected quite a number of businesses in Downpatrick, Newry, Portadown, and they all received compensation. There's farm businesses that have suffered horrendously. One particular farmer, not my constituency, he's Upper Ban actually, contacted me a few nights ago. Almost 100 acres of his land lay underwater for 3 months, so his grass is all dead, so he's no grass on the land, so he's going to have to reseed that again. Could the committee maybe write to the minister? Or it's an issue I can write to the minister personally, but I think it'd be a bit more weight to the committee. I think it is an issue not only for that farmer, but there's a lot of farmers lost heavily. If you're a farmer and you see your local businesses getting support and you're not getting any, it seems a bit unfair.
Okay, William, am I right in saying then that businesses have got some support, some financial support, but farm and agriculture seems to be left out of it? Is that right?
That's right.
So we'll write to the minister and ask what is being done.
Yeah,
is that fair?
That's okay. Yeah.
Anybody else any comment? No? Happy with that, William?
I'll do.
Thank you. Any other business? Date and time of next meeting is Thursday the 21st of March 2024, 10 a.m. in this room 21. Meeting is now adjourned. Could I ask you to just stay behind for a couple of minutes regarding the...
Committee Room 21. Sound.